Fahrenheit 451, Full Book Summary Part 1. It was a pleasure to burn. Those were the words that echoed in Guy Montag's mind as the fire licked the darkening sky, casting twisted shadows across the alleyway. He stood before a smoldering pile of books, his fireproof uniform catching the orange reflection of the flames. His black helmet gleamed. The number 451 burned across its surface, not as a warning but a symbol of duty. This was the temperature at which paper ignited, at which books, thoughts, and ideas turned to ash. Montag was a fireman, but in this world, firemen didn't put out fires, they started them. He carried a brass nozzle in his gloved hands, and from it came kerosene, the sweet, sharp stench of destruction. The books crackled and folded in on themselves as if they screamed in silence. To Montag, this was a familiar sound, a necessary symphony in the orchestra of order. Each page lost was another barrier to confusion, conflict, unrest. That was what they told him. That was what he believed. Until one night changed everything. The city was a shell of noise and light, a place where no one walked anymore, where the sky was blocked by glowing advertisements and the roads were filled with cars that moved too fast to notice the world. After another successful burn, Montag stepped into the silent street and began his walk home. The wind was warm, touched with the residue of fire. The sidewalks were empty. And then in the quiet he saw her. A girl no older than 17, barefoot, pale, and strange. Her name was Clarice McClellan, and she didn't belong in a world like this. She didn't speak like others. She didn't hide behind empty words or screens. She looked up at the sky. She asked questions, real ones. "Do you ever read any of the books you burn?" she asked. Montag laughed nervously. No one asked questions like that. No one talked like that, not anymore. Clarice smiled. "Are you happy?" Montag didn't answer. She talked about the smell of old leaves, about the way the rain felt when it hit your face, about her uncle who told stories instead of watching walls. She wasn't afraid of silence. In fact, she seemed to listen to it as if the world still had something to say. When Montag reached his house, the walls greeted him with noise. Giant screens covered the room, blaring programs. Mildred, his wife, watched day and night. She called the characters her family, though they didn't know she existed. Montag tried to speak, but she was lost in the brightness. Later that night, she overdosed. It wasn't on purpose, or at least no one would say it was. She had taken too many pills unconsciously, blindly. Montag found her motionless, her breath shallow. He called emergency services. Two indifferent technicians arrived. They weren't doctors. They brought a machine, cold, efficient, snake-like. It drained her stomach and replaced her blood. Montag watched in horror. The men chatted idly about sports while saving her life. "It happens all the time," one of them shrugged. "We get 9 or 10 cases like this a night." Montag sat beside Mildred as the machine whirred and pumped. He realized then how utterly alone he felt in his own home. The next morning, Mildred didn't remember anything. She woke up with an empty smile and asked if he had seen the latest show. She was already talking to her relatives on the wall again. Montag stared at her. She didn't remember the night before, didn't remember almost dying, didn't even seem aware she had come close to death. Montag walked the streets again. Clarice found him. She talked more about school, about how kids didn't think anymore, about how people were afraid of each other. She said things like, "Sometimes I think drivers don't know what grass is or flowers because they never see them slowly." She talked about how people used to sit on porches and talk, how billboards used to be smaller before cars got faster. Montag started looking at the world differently. He started noticing things. Clarice made him uncomfortable, but in a way he couldn't stop thinking about. She was a mirror showing him the cracks in his reflection. Then one day she disappeared. She was just gone. No warnings, no farewell, Montag asked around. His wife said she'd heard Clarice had been hit by a car. It wasn't uncommon. The roads were fast and people didn't care. They didn't stop. They didn't look back. Montag did. He kept walking past her house, hoping she'd return. He saw the lights were always off now. Her family had moved or vanished. No one cared, no one wondered, except Montag. Something began to shift in him. At work, he couldn't focus. His hands trembled. The fires didn't bring satisfaction anymore. He started to feel sick at the smell of burning pages, at the lies. Then came the old woman. They were called to her house. A tip had come in that she had books, a lot of them. She stood among them defiantly as Montag and the others broke down the door. Captain Beatty barked orders. The woman refused to leave. The books were everywhere, piles upon piles, walls made of stories. Montag touched one. It was warm, alive in his hands. She looked him in the eyes and whispered a quote he didn't understand. "Play the man, Master Ridley. We shall this day light such a candle, by God's grace, in England, as I trust shall never be put out." Beatty ordered them to burn it all, but the woman did something none of them expected. She lit the match herself. The house went up in flames with her still inside. She stood unmoving as the fire consumed everything, a martyr for something Montag had never understood. The smell of her sacrifice clung to Montag's uniform. It clung to his thoughts. He hid a book beneath his coat and took it home. That night he couldn't sleep. He asked Mildred about Clarice, about the woman, about life. She didn't understand. She was too lost in the flickering walls, in shallow conversations and artificial feelings. Montag held the stolen book in his hands. It was heavy, not in weight, but in meaning. He began to read. Part 2. The words on the page blurred. Montag's eyes were open, but his mind struggled to absorb what he read. It wasn't that the language was difficult, it was that the words were sharp. They pierced through the fog he had lived in, leaving wounds he didn't yet know how to heal. The book felt sacred, not in a religious sense, but in the way that it demanded silence and reverence. It was a relic of something lost. Montag read in short bursts, pacing the room, his heart pounding. He didn't know what he was looking for, truth maybe, or freedom, or a reason why a woman would rather die with her books than live without them. He hid the book beneath the pillow as the morning sun cut through the blinds. Mildred stirred beside him, groaning at the light. She asked him to dim it, complained about her shows, about her family on the screens. She never once asked how he was feeling. That day Montag called in sick. Captain Beatty came anyway. He stood in Montag's living room, his boots on the edge of the rug, his eyes scanning the walls, his voice calm, almost gentle. "You're not the first," Beatty said. Montag tensed. "Every fireman has a moment," Beatty continued, "a crisis of faith. It happens, we all get curious, we all wonder what's in those books." He sat down not as a guest, but as someone who already owned the space. Beatty spoke for a long time. He didn't rage or threat, he explained. He told Montag the history of how things had come to be, the slow unraveling of critical thought, the rise of speed and convenience. People didn't want to think anymore. They wanted to feel good. Books made people uncomfortable. One person's opinion offended another. One group's truth contradicted another's, so they got rid of them. No more books, no more arguments, no more debates, no more doubts. Everyone was happy, equal, calm. "Ask yourself," Beatty said, "do you want peace or do you want confusion?" Then he left. Montag didn't answer. He waited until the captain was gone, then turned to Mildred. "I want to read," he said. She panicked. "You can't, that's illegal." "I have to know." Montag revealed the hidden compartment in the ventilator shaft. Out tumbled books, not one, not two, but nearly 20. He had been collecting them for months, stolen from burnings, hidden away like forbidden fruit. Mildred stared in horror, as if the pages might explode. "We'll be arrested," she whispered. But Montag had crossed a line. He couldn't go back. He opened a book at random and read aloud. The words were strange, poetic. They didn't make sense, they didn't give answers, but they asked questions, and that was enough. Montag remembered a man, an old professor he had once met in a park long ago. The man had quoted poetry, then quickly hid the book. Montag had let him go. His name was Faber. The next day, Montag left the house under the lie of a walk and rode the underground rail to a quiet neighborhood. He remembered where Faber lived. The door creaked open slowly. Faber peered out, older now, thinner, his eyes cautious. When he saw the book in Montag's hand, he hesitated, then stepped aside. Inside, Faber's apartment was small and cluttered. Books lined the walls, real ones. Montag held out the Bible. "Is this real?" he asked. Faber touched it like a blind man touching a face. "Yes." They sat across from each other. Montag confessed everything, his doubts, his anger, his thefts, his need to understand. Faber listened patiently. "There's nothing magical in the book itself," he said. "The magic is in what it says, the texture of thought, the details of life, the ability to pause and reflect." Montag asked for help. Faber hesitated. He had long ago given up fighting. He was just a survivor now, hiding in silence. But something in Montag's desperation stirred him. He agreed to help. He gave Montag a tiny device, an earpiece like a hidden radio. Through it, they could speak in secret. Faber would guide him, teach him. If Montag wanted to fight the system from within, he would not do it alone. Their plan was bold: to plant books in firemen's homes, to create chaos, to expose the lie. Montag returned home. He tried to read with Mildred, but she wasn't interested. The pages bored her, the stories confused her. She wanted fast answers, simple plots, noise. The silence of thought made her nervous. The walls screamed with voices as she laughed with her virtual family. Montag couldn't stand it anymore. He unplugged the walls and Mildred screamed in protest. "You're killing my family. They're not real. They're more real than you." Their marriage cracked open, the hollow center exposed. Then the doorbell rang. It was Betty. Again. He looked calm, almost smug, as if he knew. Montag tensed, the earpiece buzzed in his ear. Faber whispered, "Careful, don't react." Beatty circled the room, dropping hints, quoting literature ironically, poking at Montag's growing unrest. It was a game, a warning, a threat disguised as conversation. Then the alarm sounded. A fire, they had to move. Montag followed. The truck turned, twisted, roared through the streets. The address blinked on the dashboard. Montag read it. It was his. They arrived at his home. Mildred stood outside with a suitcase, her face blank, her eyes glazed. She didn't speak to Montag, she didn't even look at him. She got in a cab and left. She had turned him in. Montag stood in front of his house, the walls still echoing with the fake voices of the screens. Beatty handed him the flamethrower. "Burn it," he said. Montag hesitated. "Your own work," Beatty sneered. "Do it." Montag sprayed kerosene, room by room, book by book, memory by memory. The fire consumed it all. Beatty watched with satisfaction. He didn't see the twitch in Montag's hand. He didn't hear Faber whispering in his ear. When it was over, Beatty made a mistake. He reached for the earpiece. He heard Faber's voice. He smiled. "You're under arrest." Montag snapped. In one smooth motion, he turned the flamethrower and pulled the trigger. Beatty didn't scream long. The others froze. Montag didn't wait, he ran. Part 3. Montag ran. The city howled behind him, sirens wailing, voices shouting, searchlights cutting through the darkness like blades. His breath came in sharp gasps. His feet pounded the concrete. There was no destination, only the primal urge to escape. Every turn, every shadow might be the last he ever saw. Somewhere behind him, the mechanical hound had been released. It wasn't alive, but it hunted like it was, eight-legged, steel-bodied, designed to sniff out fear and deviation. It didn't bark or howl, it buzzed, it clicked, and when it found you, it injected you with death. Montag sprinted through back alleys and narrow corridors. His muscles screamed. His heart was a drumbeat in his ears. He dropped the flamethrower. It clattered to the ground, useless now. He was no longer a fireman. He was prey. He ducked into a dark yard, stumbled through shrubs, and crashed through a hedge. A dog barked in the distance. Lights flicked on in windows, but no one came out. No one ever came out. The world was not brave enough to interfere. He found a gas station and paused, panting. He cleaned himself up quickly, mechanically, washing off the smell of kerosene and smoke. He bought a bottle of whiskey not to drink, but to disguise his scent. He doused his clothes, then his skin. He moved again. Faber's voice crackled in his ear. "The river, get to the river." The chase intensified. The authorities had cameras on every corner, eyes in the sky. They broadcasted his flight in real time. "A fugitive fireman on the run," the announcer said. "Armed, dangerous, an enemy of order." People in their homes watched with fascination, cheering like it was a game show. Montag ran beneath their windows and they applauded, laughed, pointed. They didn't know what he was running for. They didn't care. They just wanted distraction. The mechanical hound was close now. Montag could feel it. He didn't hear it, but he felt the pressure of its presence. The way a person knows a thunderstorm is coming just from the shift in the air. He reached the river. It shimmered in the moonlight, dark and wide. Montag didn't hesitate. He threw off the remnants of his uniform, stepped into the cold water, and let the current take him. Downstream, the city faded. The lights softened, the sound dulled. He floated for miles, his mind a blur of images. Clarice's face, the old woman's words, Beatty's last look, Mildred's cold indifference. He thought of fire, of books, of all the things he had burned and all the thoughts that had been burned from him. Eventually, the river deposited him at its edge, soft mud, quiet reeds, and a forest beyond. Montag stepped into the trees. The silence here was complete. No sirens, no screens, no hum of machinery, just wind, just breath, just being. He walked slowly, cautiously, deeper into the woods. The ground felt real beneath his feet. The stars above were not filtered or artificial. He looked up and realized this was the first time in years he had seen them without glare. He followed a faint trail. The earth was soft. Somewhere ahead, a flicker of light glowed, a campfire. Around it sat a group of men. They saw him coming, but no one moved. No one panicked. One of them stood, a tall, calm figure with a weathered face. He nodded. "You're Montag." Montag hesitated. "How do you know?" The man smiled and pointed to a small, portable screen. "They've been broadcasting your escape all night. You've become quite the celebrity." The others chuckled softly. The man introduced himself as Granger. He explained that they were travelers, intellectuals, former professors, thinkers, vagabonds, but more than that, they were the book people. Each of them carried a book, not physically, but in their memory. They had memorized entire texts. Word for word, page by page, they had become the vessels of forbidden knowledge. The world may want to forget, Granger said, but we won't let it. They welcomed Montag to their circle, gave him food, warmth, space to breathe. For the first time in years, he felt human again. Montag asked how they lived, how they survived. We walk, Granger said, we wait, and we remember. They had chosen not to fight with guns or bombs. Their rebellion was slower, quieter, but no less powerful. When the world was ready to listen again, they would speak. They asked Montag if he had anything memorized. He hesitated. Then he recited a passage from the Bible, the book of Ecclesiastes. It came out broken at first, uncertain, but it was there, hidden in him, a seed. They accepted him. The night stretched on. The fire crackled. And then on the horizon they saw it. A flash. A roar. Then a silence deeper than any Montag had ever known. The city was gone. The war that had always been simmering had finally erupted. No alarms, no sirens, just destruction, total and absolute. In a moment, the noise, the lights, the voices, they were gone. Montag stared at the horizon, the orange glow fading into blackness. He thought of Mildred, likely still watching her walls as the bomb fell. He thought of the people cheering as he ran. He thought of the silence that now covered them all. There were no victors, only survivors. Granger placed a hand on Montag's shoulder. This is not the end, he said. This is the beginning. They stood together in the dark, the forest behind them, the ruins ahead. We're going back, Granger said. When the dust settles, we'll find others, we'll teach again, we'll rebuild. Montag nodded. He didn't know what tomorrow would look like, but he knew what he carried. Not just a book, but memory, meaning, a spark. Part 4. Long before the flames and the chase, before the betrayal and the book's hidden events, Montag had lived like everyone else, unquestioning, obedient, asleep. But Clarice had changed that. He thought of her now, walking beside him down the quiet streets, her hands cupped in front of her face as if catching invisible rain. She had asked strange questions, made peculiar observations. Once, she knelt on a sidewalk just to feel the texture of the stone. Another time, she told him she tasted autumn in the air before it arrived. Why do you do that? Montag had asked. She'd tilted her head, smiling, the streetlights catching her dark hair. Because it's there. No one else noticed what was there. People rushed past the world. Clarice slowed down, she saw it. Montag had never met anyone like her, not in his firehouse where men joked about incinerating poetry, not in his home where Mildred spoke to glowing walls, not anywhere. She had seen him, not the uniform, not the job, but the person inside, the person even Montag hadn't known existed. And then she vanished. Montag had asked Beatty about her. The captain had shrugged. She was odd, dangerous maybe, too much thinking, that kind doesn't last long. Montag had clenched his fists at the time but said nothing. Now in the forest, with the firelight dancing across his face, he remembered every word she had ever spoken. Her voice was clearer than ever, echoing in the silence of the woods. "You're not like the others," she had once told him. "I've watched you, you look around." At the time, it hadn't meant much. Now it meant everything. He also thought of Beatty. Captain Beatty was a contradiction in motion, quoting Shakespeare as he ordered burnings, reciting poetry as he condemned it. He had once been a reader himself. Montag suspected this. Maybe he had lost faith. Maybe he had been broken by the contradictions of books. Beatty had known Montag was slipping. That was why he had come to his home, not to warn him, not to save him, but to corner him. Montag replayed that final moment, Beatty reaching for the earpiece, hearing Faber's voice smirking. Did Beatty want to die? Montag didn't know, but the image haunted him, the fire roaring out of the nozzle, consuming a man who had lived in fire too long. Beatty had always said, "A book is a loaded gun in the house next door, burn it." But perhaps Beatty had realized that once a gun is known, it can never be forgotten. Back at the camp, Granger sat beside Montag, sipping from a battered tin cup. The other men sat in silence, their eyes closed or staring into the fire. Montag spoke softly, "I keep thinking about the book of Ecclesiastes." Granger nodded, "Then hold on to it, repeat it, every night, say it until it's yours." Montag did. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. He didn't understand every word, not yet, but the rhythm soothed him. The idea that life had seasons, that destruction was not the end, offered hope. Granger told him the story of the phoenix. "It's an ancient myth," he said. "The bird that builds its own funeral pyre, burns itself, and rises from the ashes, over and over. We're like that," he added, "except we know what we're doing, and still we burn." Montag listened. That night they slept in shifts. The forest was still, but the horizon flickered faintly, the ruins of a city still smoldering. Montag dreamed. He dreamed of pages fluttering like birds, of Clarice dancing in falling leaves, of fire that gave warmth instead of taking life, of voices rising not in argument but in song. He woke before dawn, cold and aching, but alive. As the sun broke the horizon, the men stood and prepared to move. Granger explained that they traveled from place to place, quietly building a network. Others like them existed, pockets of memory keepers scattered across the land. They would walk until they found survivors, and when civilization began again, they would help shape it. Montag asked what would happen if the books they memorized were lost, if they died before teaching them. Granger smiled, "Then someone else will carry it. That's the beauty of memory. It's the one thing fire can't destroy." They began their journey. Each man walked in silence, the words of long-dead authors echoing in their minds. Dickens, Dostoevsky, Plato, Mark Twain. Every step was a promise that knowledge would endure even if printed pages did not. Montag walked among them, repeating verses, his voice quiet but firm. For the first time, he understood what it meant to carry something larger than himself. The world was ash, but he had become a seed. Part 5. Before Clarice, before Faber, before the flames that turned against him, Montag had been what the world wanted him to be: quiet, efficient, numb. He had followed the rules, burned the books, laughed with his firehouse crew. He had come home each night to the glowing walls of his parlor, to Mildred's lifeless chatter, to the soft hum of emptiness. Now, walking with the book people through the misty forest, he began to realize just how deep the silence in his old life had run. He thought of Mildred. In the weeks leading up to everything, the old woman's death, Beatty's visit, Clarice's disappearance, Mildred had drifted further into her screens. She had been more concerned with fictional characters than with the man lying beside her. Her days were filled with soap opera dramas, meaningless voting games, and fragmented conversations with electronic relatives who spoke in hollow tones and constant interruptions. Montag had once tried to explain what he was feeling. He had spoken of the dreamlike quality of life, of the nagging sense that something was missing. Mildred had looked at him, confused and annoyed, as though he were speaking another language. "Why would you want to read?" she had asked. "Books aren't real, they don't talk back." "They talk more than these walls do," Montag had said. She turned away, shaking her head. "You're sick, you need rest or entertainment." He remembered how she'd popped a pill right after that conversation, just one of many. The pills were like punctuation marks in her day, pauses between meaninglessness. And the silence between them had grown like a chasm. Montag hadn't noticed how deeply alone he was until Clarice arrived. She'd asked questions Mildred never had. "What do you do when you're not burning books? Why did you become a fireman? Do you ever look at the stars?" Montag hadn't had answers, not then, but her questions had opened something in him, something Mildred and the whole city had tried to bury. He remembered one morning when he'd asked Mildred if she remembered where they had met. She hadn't. "It doesn't matter," she'd said, scrolling through her interactive screen. "Why should we remember silly things like that?" "It's our beginning," Montag had said. But to her, it was irrelevant, just another useless fact like books or history or feelings. Now walking beneath the trees, Montag saw the absurdity of it all. People had traded meaning for entertainment. They had replaced connection with noise. They had given up thinking because it was too painful, too slow. They wanted speed, ease, instant pleasure. But it would cost. The city was gone now, Mildred's likely gone with it. She'd probably been watching her wall, smiling at her family, not even aware the bomb had been dropped. Montag clenched his fists. Not out of hatred, but grief. Grief for a society that had allowed itself to rot from within. Grief for a woman who might have been so much more if only she had looked away from the screen and into the world. Granger noticed his silence. "You're thinking of someone," he said. Montag nodded. "My wife." Granger didn't press, he simply walked beside him, offering quiet company. They moved through the forest, their boots muffled by damp leaves. The air was cool and still. Birds chirped in the distance, real ones, not synthetic sounds from a speaker. The world here moved slowly, deliberately. Montag wondered how long it had been since he'd noticed a bird's call, or the texture of bark, or the smell of soil after rain. Later that day, they stopped to rest beside a small stream. The men sat in a circle, sharing food and stories. One man, Fred, had memorized Gulliver's Travels. He spoke of its satire, its absurdity, and its warnings. Another, Simmons, had taken on Plato's Republic. He recited passages about justice and the nature of truth. Montag listened, absorbing every word. He felt like a student again, hungry, open, curious. When it was his turn, he recited from Ecclesiastes. The verses were still rough, but he spoke them with heart. To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven. The men listened with respect. Afterwards, Granger approached him. "You're doing well," he said. "I don't feel like I know anything," Montag replied. Granger smiled. "That's a good place to start. The truly ignorant are the ones who think they know everything." They walked together for a while. Granger spoke of his grandfather, a sculptor. He hadn't been famous. He hadn't left behind great works. but he had fixed things, mended furniture, repaired shoes, helped neighbors. "He touched lives," Granger said, "and when he died, I realized something. What we do counts. Not what we own, not what we say, what we do." Montag let the words settle. In a world obsessed with image, speed, and illusion, action had become revolutionary. That night, as the fire crackled, Montag stared into the flames. He thought about fire differently now. It had once been a weapon, a force of destruction in his hands, but now it was warmth, light, life. He understood that fire could cleanse as well as consume. That books could hurt, yes, but they could also heal. That silence was not emptiness, but space to reflect. That memory was not weakness, but resistance. He was changing, not just in thought, but in being. Part 6. The sun was rising again. The forest glowed gold through the mist, shafts of light slicing through the trees like silent trumpets announcing the day. Montag sat by the dying fire, his fingers stained with ash and earth, his mind clearer than it had ever been. He had left behind a city that never stopped moving, never stopped screaming, selling, burning. Now every moment felt deliberate, every breath was chosen. Granger sat beside him, silent. The other men packed quietly. They had heard rumors of a nearby settlement, survivors lost and afraid, in need of guidance. That would be their next destination. Montag helped tie up the supplies, then looked back toward the distant horizon where the city once stood. Only a faint haze remained now. The fire had done its work. But unlike the fires Montag used to wield, this one had not been precise. It had not selected books or heretics or rebels. It had taken everything. And yet Montag did not despair. As they walked, Granger spoke about history. "Every civilization," he said, "has burned itself at some point, not always with fire, sometimes with silence, sometimes with forgetfulness." He spoke of the dark ages, of lost libraries, of rewritten histories. "It always comes back to the same thing," he said. "People get afraid of what they don't understand, so they destroy it. But understanding doesn't die," he added. "It waits." Montag listened carefully. He realized that books had never been about pages or ink. They were vessels of thought, of struggle, of vision. What had been lost in the cities could be rebuilt, not immediately, not easily, but slowly. Deliberately, like fire in reverse. The group arrived at a ridge overlooking a dry plain. In the distance, ruins jutted from the earth, scattered concrete skeletons, bent steel bones. Somewhere within them were people. Granger and the others set up a temporary camp. They would go in when night fell, quietly, respectfully. Montag sat apart for a while. He looked at his hands, hands that had once lit a match to poetry, hands that had killed a man, hands that now carried scripture in memory. He repeated a passage under his breath. "And the leaves of the tree were for the healing of the nations." He didn't fully grasp what it meant, but he would. Later that night, Granger handed Montag a small, tattered notebook. "What's this?" "Your job," Granger said. The pages were blank. "You're going to write it down," he said. "Ecclesiastes, all of it, word by word." Montag nodded slowly. It felt sacred. Each word he put on the page would be a rebellion, a light in the darkness. A testament that even after the world had burned itself to the ground, the seeds of thought had survived. They slept in shifts. The stars above them were impossibly clear. No haze, no screens, just space and silence. Montag lay awake watching the sky. He thought of the people they would meet soon, the children who had never read a story, the elders who had forgotten poetry, the skeptics who feared ideas. He wondered if he was ready to teach. Then he remembered Clarice's voice. "You're not like the others." He had once doubted her, now he knew she had seen something true. At dawn they moved. Montag walked at the front, the notebook in his pack, the verses in his mind. They passed a stream where deer drank without fear, a grove where birds nested in silence. The world was rebuilding itself without permission. So would they? In the closing miles, Granger told a final story. "Have you ever heard of the Mirror Factory?" he asked. Montag shook his head. "There was once a factory that made mirrors," Granger said. "Then one day it burned down, but the people said they would rebuild it, not to sell mirrors, but to look at themselves." Montag understood. The world didn't need more screens, it didn't need more distractions, it needed reflection. Truth. Books. Memory. As they crossed into the outskirts of the ruined settlement, Montag felt no fear. Only purpose. He had been a destroyer. Now he would become a builder. The end.